As you consider how the U.S. might calibrate this response, how critical is it to know whether or not this was intentional on the part of the Iranians?
Yeah, I mean, I think because they're firing something across the strait, whether it was intended to hit the Apache or intended to hit something else, it's highly likely that it was a kinetic weapon being shot across the strait. So I think the president's right that he has to hold them accountable. The real question will be, as your reporter, she properly stated, is this going to be a proportionate response or a disproportionate response? I'm hoping that the president sticks to the same advice he gave Benjamin Netanyahu, I believe, over the weekend, which is don't do it, but if you do it, be proportionate. Because we're trying to prevent this from getting out of control while we keep a lid on these so that we can get to a negotiated settlement on the Strait of Hormuz.
Mm-hmm. How do we define proportionate in this case, Admiral? Iran's not flying around Apache helicopters to do an eye for an eye here. What would work for you? So
I think a proportionate response in this case is before, when they fired and not hit Americans' ships. Our ships have shot down the drones and missiles over. Last week it happened in 2 different occasions. What we did was proportionate strikes against the sites that fired at us. So in this case, what I would do is the sites that fired at us, plus maybe where we know stowage to be, command and control to be, maybe additional radar sites, things that weren't directly involved in this, in a drone launch or a missile launch, but are still of a kind, military in the Bandar Abbas or Strait of Hormuz area. So a thick strike, but not a strike that escalates into, if you start striking economic targets, then that would be an escalation, disproportionate escalation. So I'm hoping he keeps it to military targets in the Bandar Abbas area.
Mm-hmm. But even if he does keep it to those things, Admiral, would it constitute an end to the ceasefire? Can we even still credibly call it one?
Well, we had last week. They fired twice at 2 different sets of occasions, and we struck back in a very, very proportionate way. I mean, the president's trying to keep a lid on it, and I think that will determine. Hopefully, that will gauge his response in this one. He's going to shoot. He said he was. I think he's generally on these kind of issues kept his word within about 24 hours. So I expect a strike, tonight, in the dark, in the darkness in Iran that's starting right now, and at some point in there, and then hopefully we'll keep it proportionate, military targets only, maybe slightly larger than we did last week.
Admiral, do you believe the American people are receiving an accurate portrait of what is happening in the Strait? The ships that are actually passing through, as the Energy Secretary suggested today, increased flows. I've had some folks suggest on the air that there is no blockade. Do we actually know what's going on?
So there are 2 blockades. One, we are blockading Iranian fossil fuels from getting out. I think, generally speaking, that's working. Do I think small movements happen where Iran gets to another Iranian port, Iranian ship might get to a Pakistani port, never leaving territorial waters potentially? Those are small potatoes. The big ships going to India and China are being blocked. I think a small number of Western ships are coming through the Southern Transit Scheme, the one closest to Oman, with general guidance from the U.S. on what's a clear, mine-free path. We call it a Q route in the military, and with some level of overhead support that has recently shot down a number of missiles and drones probably headed at those ships. And things like these Apaches and A-10s up to shoot down small boats. And to the degree that there are very few small boats coming out at these ships now. But those are small numbers, and the secretary's averted that. What's getting big is the pipeline passes. I think both the UAE pipeline to Oman and the Saudi cross-peninsula pipeline to the western part of Saudi Arabia are both going, probably getting near their maximum capacity as they pump around the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, and as we consider those alternate routes, it raises the question about whether or not the Red Sea is still going to be viable, given the threats we saw from the Houthis against Israeli vessels, in particular after the firing between Israel and Iran in the last few days. Admiral, we saw the struggle we had militarily with the Red Sea when the Houthis did this a few years ago. Would we be able to maintain the blockade and deal with a challenge like that in the Red Sea if it were indeed to get to that point?
I think that would tie up more ships, but the Navy's able to do that. Again, the head of the Navy would tell you there's a time limit on doing all these kind of operations and doing more at the same time, saying the Bab el-Mandeb, which is the straits by Yemen where the Houthis are, will, put more of a demand signal on the Navy. We might be able to strip some ships from the carrier strike groups, things like that. The point is, ships will be able to flow through there. The U.S. can protect ships against, escort ships individually, big, large VLCCs. That's the 2 million barrel carriers through the Strait of Hormuz. If they come out, if they're piped, if it's piped across, if there's a pipeline across Saudi Arabia, that's coming down. So I think we can do, I know we can do that. And the Houthis were weakened significantly by strikes we in Israel did last fall and the loss of their benefactor. Iran provided them with the parts necessary to build a lot of their drones and ballistic missiles. That delivery pipeline has been hollowed out by the United States over the last 2.5, 3 months. So the Houthis are a threat. I don't believe they're determinative, and the Bab el-Mandeb is a much easier strait to maintain open than the Strait of Hormuz.
I want to ask you about the rescue operation quickly while you're with us, Admiral. Pretty remarkable to see an unmanned boat, a drone boat called a Corsair, retrieve these two people out of the water. What we're told was a first for the U.S. military. We're showing some video of that unmanned craft right now on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube. Did we just glimpse the future, Admiral?
We did, and I've glimpsed this future a few months ago. I spent a lot of time in Ukraine with their military forces, and the Ukrainians have been using ground drones, like what look like little John Deere tractors, pulling carts behind them to load their wounded and sometimes dead and bring and retrieve them from the battlefield. So unmanned vehicles doing this in the battlefield is not new. Doing it at sea is really unique, and I have to give Central Command a lot of credit. This minimizes the risk to your CSAR, your combat search and recovery forces, by having this go out and pick them up. Now, obviously, the pilots need to be in good shape. You need to understand they're in good shape. There's a proximity issue. Usually a helicopter can be brought up to do this. But if you don't know how they were shot down, this might have been the great alternative if the timing was right in terms of the Corsair being in proximity, the pilots both being in good physical condition, which they clearly were, because you have to clamber on that thing. At least one person has to be in very good condition.